Sandnes, who studied with Pablo Casals. He is this Spanish anti-fascist who said, "I dedicate my life to truth, beauty, and peace." In many ways, that sets the tone for today. I'm going to let Peter Eisenstein present the first speakers today. You have him in your program in front of you.
Hello, and thank you for coming here this morning for a conference that is going to prove to be very much needed at the moment. First, I'd like to say that it was a great American protest singer, Phil Oakes, who said that in ugly times, beauty is the true protest. I'd like to thank Ingvild Sandnes one more time for giving us such a beautiful beginning to a day where we're going to be talking about some ugly things. My name is Peter Eisenstein. I am co-deputy chair of Rettferdighet 4. I'm also a member of the Jüdische Stimme für Rettferdighet. And the conference today has the title of Stop the Wars, Strengthen International Law. And that is really the beginning of what we need to do today, to take concrete steps to make this change. We have guests today from around the world, from Palestine, from Egypt, from the United States, Greece, Italy, France, the UK, the United Nations, Iceland, and that exotic country of Sweden. And we're going to begin today with Ramzi Rabah. Ramzi Rabah is a member of the executive committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization. He is also head of the anti-apartheid movement, anti-apartheid department of the PLO. So please welcome Ramzi Rabah.
صباح الخير للجميع.
Good morning, everyone.
الزملاء والأصدقاء والسيدات والسادة حضور في هذا المؤتمر.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen.
لأن خطابي بالعربية.
His speech will be in Arabic, therefore.
وليس هناك ترجمة مباشرة.
And due to the shortness of time,
فسيساعدني زميلي رشيد في تقديم الخطاب مترجما بالإنجليزي.
I will help him with the translation of the speech.
جئنا من فلسطين ننقل إليكم تحيات الشعب الفلسطيني ومنظمة التحرير الفلسطينية والصامدين في قطاع غزة والضفة الغربية والقدس في مناطق 48 والشتات الفلسطيني. تحيات صادقة ومخلصة لهذا المؤتمر الحيوي والهام.
From Palestine we came to your conference and to bring the greetings of the Palestinian people, the Palestine Liberation Organization, and the steadfast individuals in Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, the 1948 territories, and the diaspora. We extend sincere regards to the Free Word Foundation and the efforts of our colleague John, coupled with the appreciation and gratitude for all that Norway, its people, institutions, and political parties provide in support of Palestine, in stopping the Israeli genocide, and for the honorable position of the Norwegian government and the Labour Party in recognizing our people's right to self-determination and the independent Palestine state within the border of June 4, 1967. We also value Norway's efforts and contribution to the cause of freedom and justice for Palestine and the liberation of our people from the nightmare and the last remaining occupation in the world. On the day the ceasefire in Gaza took effect and the dust of war settled, the horrific consequences of the genocide emerged. Scenes of unimaginable destruction of towns, villages, and refugee camps. 80% of Gaza was wiped off the map, where the rubble of destruction mixed with the bodies and blood of thousands of civilians, including children and women. The total destruction and the killing of tens of thousands, with many more injured, were not acts of retaliation for the events of October 7th, nor were they targeted attacks on the resistance or Hamas. Rather, they constituted a campaign of genocide against the Palestinian people as part of a systematic Israeli policy that has persisted since the Palestinian Nakba of 1948, when the Zionist movement and Israeli occupation forcibly displaced 80% of the Palestinian people from their homeland, destroying 530 villages and towns and establishing Israel on the ruins of the Palestinian people. The war on Gaza has only one definition: genocide, ethnic cleansing, and total destruction. An operation led by a fascist government executing a colonial settler plan at the expenses of the indigenous population by displacing them, continuing the long-standing war of erasure against the Palestinian people for the past 76 years. Yet, the Palestinian people have endured, resisted, and defended their land, country, and national dignity for decades, engaging in one of the most remarkable and noble struggles through uprising and national resistance. Despite all the sacrifices, suffering, and pain, they continue to hold on to hope. In the West Bank, the occupation government persists in its aggression even after the ceasefire in Gaza, employing the same fascist methods of attacks on refugee camps and villages through killing, incursions, total destruction, and displacement. Lately, from Jenin refugee camp alone, 4,000 families have been displaced, and from Tulkram camp, 1,500 families. Homes are being demolished and burned. This bloody assault is a prelude to the annexion of large parts of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem as part of Netanyahu's plan to resolve the conflict by establishing Greater Israel from the river to the sea. Imagine that this area between the river and the sea is a home to two populations, 7.5 million Palestinians and 7 million Israelis. How can the entire land be subjected to Israel's sovereignty? The only solution, envisioned by Israel Research Center, is forced displacement, destruction, and eradication to eliminate what they call the demographic bomb. The ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing, along with its devastating consequences, have not shaken the conscience of the United States, which has been Israel's biggest partner in this aggression. The Trump administration took it even further by advocating for the mass displacement of the Palestinians from Gaza, aiming to empty the land of its people and relocate them to neighboring Arab countries. This statement reeks of hostility towards Palestinians, denying their right to live in their homeland and to rebuild what the occupation destroyed with American bombs and missiles. This requires widespread condemnation and rejection, especially since this call blatantly violates international law and legitimate international resolution. The international community's inability to stop the massacre, genocide, and the unchecked aggression of the US and Zionist forces, significant challenges to global civil society and the mass movement that have erupted in cities and capitals worldwide to support justice and freedom and to curb fascism, and racism while rejecting wars waged by dominant colonial powers. The American-Israeli plan to forcibly displace our people throughout the occupied territories, both in the West Bank, including Jerusalem, and Gaza, aligns with Israel's decision to ban the activities of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, in the occupied territories and to seize its properties in East Jerusalem. This also coincides with Trump's decision to cut UNRWA's funding, financially strangling it, and dry up its resources, thereby crippling its program and shifting the entire burden of Palestinian refugees relief on the host countries. This is a blatant attempt to dismantle the right of return, threatening regional stability with severe consequences. Respecting international law as a foundation for global relations, particularly by applying it to occupied peoples such as the Palestinians, and curbing the Israeli apartheid regime, requires strengthening and expanding global popular movement and intensifying their struggle. In this conference, we seek together to develop a joint action program along these lines and propose that the conference resolutions and recommendations be a resounding call to reject and condemn Trump's statement advocating for the displacement of Palestinians, instead of demanding the withdrawal of Israeli occupation forces from Palestinian territories in accordance with international law. Emphasizing the urgent need to end the continuous war on Gaza and the West Bank, allowing Palestinians to heal, receive aid, and rebuild what the Israeli aggression has destroyed. Highlighting the legal, humanitarian, and ethical dimensions of the issue of Palestinian prisoners in Israel. Calling on the international community and the United Nations to declare Israel as a state outside the bounds of international law due to its systematic violations of the UN Charter and international humanitarian law in its treatment of Palestinian detainees. Urging your conference to exert all possible pressure to enforce international law, United Nations resolutions, and Security Council decisions compelling the Israeli occupation to comply. Implementing the advisory opinions of the International Court of Justice regarding the end of the occupation of Palestinian territories, investigating Israel's crime of genocide, and executing the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant against the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister for committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. Holding Israel accountable for its crime and violations and ensuring it does not escape punishment is crucial to deterring its aggression, stopping its attempt at displacement and land confiscation, and necessitating increased action within the framework of the BDS movement. We must urge European countries and the European Union to suspend trade and economic agreements with Israel and completely halt arms shipments and military support. The only path to peace and a rightful resolution of the conflict lies in ending the occupation and launching a political process under the UN supervision to implement its resolution, ensuring the Palestinian people's right to self-determination in an independent state with Jerusalem as its capital within the June 4, 1967 border, while securing the right of refugees to return to their home from which they were expelled. Social campaigns and mobilizations will play a decisive role in holding the Israeli government accountable by freezing Israel's membership in international trade union and organizations, including the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and increasing pressure to freeze its membership in the UN General Assembly until it abides by international law and UN resolution. We salute the brave Francesca Albanese for her efforts and resounding voice against the international community, and to the essence of her work and words, whoever sees a crime and does not stop it while he can is an accomplice in it. International justice and our humanity are at stake. wishing your conference all success and progress. Thank you.
شكرا. بعد يومين سنعود إلى فلسطين.
Thank you. After 2 days, we will return to Palestine.
سنحمل قرارات مؤتمركم لشعبنا في فلسطين.
We will carry the resolution of this conference to our people in Palestine,
وخاصة في قطاع غزة.
especially in the Gaza Strip.
ونحمل معه ذكريات جميلة من أوسلو.
And we will carry wonderful and beautiful moments from Oslo.
وبردها الحار الذي وجدناه في قلوبكم.
And the warmth of your hearts within.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just so everyone understands the way the program is set up, we have the first 5 speakers here, all of whom again are experts in their field, and they will each make their short speech, their statements, being listened to by our devil's advocates who are making notes and are going to then question them when all 5 are finished, based on topics and items they might have overlooked or maybe deliberately overlooked. We'll find out what the devil's advocates have to say about that when we're finished with the first 5 speakers. And of course, we will also take questions from the public as well. So please make your notes and come with good questions to our panel as we go forward. Our next speaker is Robert Lipton, who comes to us from San Francisco. Robert is an epidemiologist, a poet, an activist, and one of the co-founding board member of Jewish Voice for Peace, which is the fastest growing Jewish organization in the United States. He will talk to us about the student movement in the United States in favor, in support of Palestine. So please, Robert Lipton.
Can you hear me okay? There's this complex electronic storm around me. Thank you for being here, and I really, really appreciate the chance to be amongst all these wonderful people trying to work so hard on like the most difficult kind of issue. We started JVP in the late 90s with about as many people as are sitting around one of these tables, and with no real sense that anything could happen with it, but also with this emergency sense that something bad is going to happen without any doubt unless a group like a Jewish Voice for Peace could battle up against. Everyone knows AIPAC, the term. They're the main Zionist lobby in the U.S. Probably, yeah. And we never thought we would get to this point. I've been talking to some of my colleagues here about that. It's bittersweet. We've grown to about 750,000 members and supporters. And that's wonderful. At the same time, the reasons for it are the worst. And but that's bad. But the good, again, we're going to go back and forth between good and bad. The good is that it has radicalized a young segment, not just of Jews in the U.S., but of all sorts of young people, of all colors and ethnicities. All of a sudden, within about a 4-month period, they became radicalized. They became aware of the Middle East. And we never in a million years thought that was going to happen. So these encampments started, if you were following a little bit, around April, when Columbia University, the typical administration type things, they tried to shut down a small protest, and in return they got an international student protest. And so I was actually here in May, and I met with students at the encampment at the Oslo University, and that was very inspiring. And just the idea that that could happen anywhere. So that was, to me, to my mind, an important indicator, because how many, at my experience, I've been working in this area, unfortunately, for 40 years, was that young people were not coming to our movement that much because the idea of anti-Zionist, anti-colonial oppression, all that, just because they didn't know anything about it. They said, yeah, we did and I just wanted to very quickly say, and then we can talk later, that this explosion, radical explosion at this point, we don't know where it's going to go. Right now, there's huge amounts of student planning, but there's also massive repression on some of those universities, like Columbia and New York University and Harvard, and others, the universities and colleges have responded okay. So it grew to about 150 colleges in the U.S. across 36 states, and about 2,500 kids were arrested during those kind of encampment situations. That's gone. That more active, explicit kind of encampments approach has since changed more into active planning, similar to, hopefully we'll get something out here, of action, organization and action. And because of all these radicalized students, no matter the university repression, there is this, the Middle East, Palestine is on the radar. It's never going away now. And that's going through, younger populations like a virus in a good way. And it's done at this point, and we don't know what's going to happen through this year. The spring, there might be other encampment situations, but the students and faculty at these universities are starting to organize in a way that goes beyond the university. Jewish Voice for Peace, Students for Justice in Palestine were both highly represented at almost all these encampments, and both groups gave a certain infrastructural support to how students were approaching these situations. And that's still continuing to this day. And I just wanted, to the extent people have questions about that, this is an ongoing situation. We're trying to grow JVP's collaboration and support through Europe. That's one of my purposes here. I'm a member representative. I'm not in leadership. I'm kind of reporting to leadership, as well as having a strong connection to Norway. I've worked and lived here for years and then have many friends here. And I just wanted to thank everyone here again for their presence, plus our colleagues, and I'm looking forward to the discussions with you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robert. And our next speaker is Professor Haim Bresheeth. Professor Bresheeth is the son of Holocaust survivors who moved to Israel when he was 2 years old. He has since been an outspoken critic of Zionism. His latest book, An Army Like No Other, is a remarkable reflection on the IDF as the transcendent factor of Israeli identity. Professor Bresheeth is the founder of the Jewish Network for Palestine, and some of you might have heard this, some of you might not have. He was recently arrested by the London Metropolitan Police for a short speech he gave outside in London. And he might not mention it today, but afterwards you might want to ask him, I don't know if he's going to mention it, but he received a visit from some friends of his in Israel last night at his hotel while he was not there. So, just to show you how popular he is among certain crowds. So, hated by all the right people. So, Professor Bresheeth.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this august conference, and I'm very honored to be with my great members on the panel. And just to say about Jewish Network for Palestine, when I came to Britain in 1972 to study, there were 10 Jewish anti-Zionists in Britain. I was number 10, I was the youngest. There are now tens of thousands of Jewish anti-Zionists in Britain. Before I read my talk to you, I want to read the words of Dr. Radha Kami, a very dear old friend, a Palestinian activist, academic, and author, who is ill and could not join us today. She sent me this to read to you. It's very few minutes. I'm sorry that I can't be with you today, but I have jotted down a few thoughts you might find interesting. In my view, we don't need more description or analysis of Israel's crimes, nor do we need a discussion of Palestinian suffering and victimization. In a gathering of people who understand and are knowledgeable about the issues such as this meeting, there is, in my view, only one thing we need to talk about, and that is what is to be done about Israel. Everyone is clear, I think, that Israel's creation in Palestine in 1948 had severe deleterious effects on the Palestinians and the Middle East region. Not a single advantage from Israel's creation has ever benefited the Arab world. Wars erupted from the start of its creation, the first in 1948-9, through to the Suez in 1956, to the War of 1967, to the then October War of 1973, to the Lebanon invasion of 1982, and the Lebanon War of 2006. Throughout Israel's lifetime of 76 years, the region has known nothing but strife and conflict. Its economies and its development skewed towards defense and arms purchases. And today we have a genocide in Gaza, ethnic cleansing on the West Bank, invasions in Lebanon and Syria with land grabs, and on top of that, the threat of war with Iran. To sum up, Israel has been hugely destabilizing for the Middle East and poses a threat of wider war in the region. But the threat to international law and the whole international order is even graver, and nothing has been resolved. The need for action to stop this rapid decline into chaos is what must be discussed. I believe Norway is an important, if not unique, with a role to play in this situation. I would suggest that at the very least, Norway should push vigorously for the reinstatement of UNRWA. But second, it should make attempts to establish a line of communication with the Hamas leadership. It's to recognize that Hamas is the ruler of Gaza, no one else, and the setting up a line of communication is the sensible thing to do. Whatever future is decided for Gaza cannot happen without Hamas. To sum up, Norway should push for a counter-proposal to Trump's, that the people of Gaza should be evacuated to their previous villages and towns in Israel, from which they were expelled in 1948, while reconstruction takes place to make Gaza inhabitable again. That is the only destination for them. Finally, and most ambitiously, Norway should push for the suspension of Israel's UN membership, in association perhaps with South Africa and Ireland. The argument must be made that Israel has been in breach of the rules of the UN membership from 1949 and has continued down that path ever since. It is unlikely any of this will be accepted, but discussion of such points raises their visibility and makes them familiar as ideas. Thank you very much for listening to my work. I shall also read my own presentation, which is not very long. Listening to Trump's insane mumblings about expelling all Palestinians from Gaza to Egypt, Jordan, and anywhere else, I remembered Hitler's infamous speech in the Reichstag on January 30, 1939. This is called the prophet speech because he prophesies the destruction of European Jewry in that speech. This happened a few weeks after the Kristallnacht, in which he reacted to Western accusations of German atrocity against Jews. He said, "If Jews are such noble citizens and you care so much about them, then how come you are not letting them in?" He's speaking about the West. "I will gladly ship them to you at my expense, even on luxury liners." In many ways, Trump has out-Hitlered Hitler. In his press conference with Netanyahu on Wednesday, like Hitler before him, he has attacked the most maligned and attacked group on earth, the Palestinians. Today, humanity wakes up to the greatest challenge in its history. The new emperor proves to be totally naked as any emperor has ever been. Not satisfied with turning his US base backwards, accelerating climate change, undermining human rights and the rights of women, and sniping at all around with his punitive tariffs and threats of US occupation of various countries, he now turned his venom against Gaza. Instead of rebuilding Gaza for its traumatized and homeless survivors of US bombings by Israel, delivered with US munitions, this is by a state calling itself falsely a Jewish state. Trump will take over Gaza and rebuild it as the Riviera of the Middle East. Realizing Netanyahu's plan of last year, to do all that, he wants to force some Arab countries to remove the surviving Palestinians, and this is what he calls the deal of the century. In a recent article I wrote with Ramzi Nasir in Al Jazeera, we have proposed that while the Palestinians, not anybody else, rebuild Gaza so that its people have somewhere to live, they should be actually housed in Israel. After all, this is where most of them came from when it was called Palestine. To exile its survivors is to justify the genocide and the terrifying destruction by Israel, US, and the rest of the West, who financed, armed, and supported it. Salman Abu Sita, the famed Palestinian geographer, has proved that there is space for all the Palestinians between the river and the sea, that is with the refugees, without expelling anyone. But the emperor has better ideas which will help his son-in-law to make a lot of money and some oil sheiks to build palaces on the Mediterranean. The emperor of naked power has decided that he has the power to oppose not just the people of Gaza, the most wronged population on earth, harmed with the products of American capitalism in the hands of genocidal Israel, but all the people of Palestine, whose rights he denies and turned their land into a Zionist stronghold of America. By this measure of the cruelest injustice imaginable, buying into the colonial agenda of Netanyahu, Trump has declared war not just on Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, but on the rest of the world, on the UN, and on the very concept and practice of international law, and on legality itself. The most powerful empire in the world has declared war on the smallest and most traumatized community, that of Palestine, which has been destroyed for over a century, not just by Israel and the US, but by the whole West. This is not just a brutal act of defying law and order. This is an act of defying humanity and history, of defying hope for a better world in which naked power cannot enslave whole countries to the will of despots, and in which it cannot ethnically cleanse millions at the will and use genocide to threaten the rest into bending before its power. The United States is not rising from the ashes to become great again. It uses the weakest community on earth to demonstrate that its declining power is able to hurt and punish those who dare to wish for freedom. Palestine, like South Africa before it, is a symbol of justice denied, of rights negated, of hopes crushed. By denying not just the law, justice, and common humanity, but the ideas and ideals which have led to the rise of the free people of America and their Constitution. However, let us never forget that the rise of the US was the result of one of the most terrifying genocides in history, a continent-wide destruction of the indigenous people of North American continent and the enslavement of another continent, that of Africa. The act of aggression by Trump is just a cruel throwback to an older genocide in order to support a current genocide. In this genocide, made possible by the funding, arms, and active support of the declining West, especially the US and the EU, is but an object lesson for the rest of humanity. Obey or else. You either follow orders or perish horribly. This is a clarion call of barbarity, a loud challenge to humanity and its future and freedom. It cannot be ignored because the power concentrated in the evil empire is spread around the globe, realized and expressed through the 1,000 bases of raw power which threaten all humanity. The coming together of the richest man in the world with his Hitler salute in support of fascists and Nazis everywhere, and the Zionized tyrant of capitalist hubris is a call for action which must be heeded. They use Islamophobia to attack Palestine as an icons of Arabs and Muslims. But this will not end with Palestine or Panama or Greenland or Canada or Mexico. This is a global threat to us all. And to end, Trump has now tossed the glove into the international arena, and humanity must lift it, must for the first time unite against tyranny of power across the globe. It is now or never. In this symbolic challenge to our humanity, values and fragile systems of international law and the principles of justice is ignored. If is ignored, we shall all end up as serfs and slaves to the declining power, to the declining rationality of the West, personified and produced in the figure of the inflated emperor, a victim of hubris the world has never seen before, and which will lead us straight into destruction, not just of law and order, but of the planet itself. In supporting the worldwide opposition to the Trumpian edict, Jews must be front and center of the resistance to the empire. A long history going back to Palestine, where we lived together with Jews, with Muslims and Christians for 2,000 years, tells us that clearly avoiding or ignoring such deluded tyrants exacts a terrible price, paid by whole continents. We cannot afford to be silent at such a testing time when Israel is acting in our name, and must step forward and join the rest of humanity in the quest for justice. Trump's solution is a further crime. The real solution is very different. Getting rid of the Zionist colonial project, establishing a free democracy in Palestine where the Auda, the return of the refugees, can happen, and with justice and equality from the river to the sea. Those Israeli Jews refusing to live in equality, peace and justice with the Palestinians should be invited by Trump to live with racists like them in the US. They have no place in Palestine. Instead of being expelled, the people of Gaza should be welcomed back in the land, crossing into Israel as citizens of the free Republic of Palestine, while Gaza is built by Palestinians for Palestinians. To end, this will require the UN correcting its terrible mistake of 1947, which have brought the Nakba and destroyed Palestine. It will require the ejection of Israel from the General Assembly, as was done to South Africa in 1973, because of apartheid. If this was right in 1973, it is 1,000 times more justified in the case of Palestine, with illegal occupation, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. This will require other actions, such as a UN protection force to guarantee the lives of Palestinians in the transformation period. Where there is a will, there is a way. As we were told by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and President Mandela, none of us are free until Palestine is free. Never before was the wisdom of the words as clear as it is today. Humanity must rise and defend Palestine as the best way of defending itself, its future, and its freedom. Thank you very much. As we speak here today, this is published online by the Electronic Intifada. Very good for them to do that today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bresheeth. Our next speaker is someone who used to be the co-leader of, the deputy leader of Norway's only peace party. And when that party decided to support NATO, she decided to form her own party so Norway would have a peace party. And that is Marielle Leraand, who is the leader of Rettferdighet.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm so glad to be here with all of you so sincerely dedicated to the Palestinian cause. The Palestinian question is a moral issue about justice for the Palestinians all over Palestine, and a political issue about what kind of world we want to live in. It is also a personal issue, as we have, or should have been, impacted on a personal level having witnessed on our smartphones a real-life genocide unfolding for 16 months now. My personal relationship with the Palestinian cause goes further back, starting in the summer of 1994, a few months after the Oslo Accords were signed. I got a scholarship from the University of Bergen to study the Arabic language and Middle East at the University of Bresheeth at the occupied West Bank. A couple of weeks into my stay at the university, as I was acclimatizing, I was only 19 years old and had never seen soldiers from an occupying force patrolling in the streets with military vehicles. I had not imagined the area being filled with protests already back then. As the story back home, the Norwegian newspapers told us that there was now an Oslo agreement that had brought peace and near about justice. I was surprised to see how much resistance and disappointment there already was among the Palestinian students I became friends with. And a couple of weeks into my stay, a lovely day as I was walking in the sun, heading for the market in Ramallah to buy some vegetables and fruits, then suddenly I was dragged forcefully into a small shop. Outside I heard noise, someone shooting. All came out of the clear blue sky. I saw nothing unusual that could have made me alert. And the man in the shop rescued me from what was suddenly exploding outside the door. 2 people were killed that sunny day in Ramallah in July 1994. An old Palestinian woman and a young Palestinian man, shot dead by Israeli soldiers. And in the forthcoming days, Ramallah was closed down under Israeli military rule, and as a collective punishment, Israel cut off water supplies. Military patrols were driving around shouting from loudspeakers day and night, "Mamnu'a tadakhul, mamnu'a tadakhul, curfew, curfew." The Bresheeth University was closed down, and my Arabic education and everyone else's education was put on hold. So why am I telling you this personal story? A personal story that is just exactly a personal description of what I experienced as an outsider, as coming from the country that had facilitated the famous Oslo Accords. Well, I wanted to tell you something about the narrative. I called my boyfriend back home, I called my parents. No one back home had heard anything about 2 people being shot dead in the occupied West Bank that day in July 1994. No headlines nowhere in the coming days, not at any point in time. Just 2 people, 2 Palestinians shot dead. No Israeli soldiers held accountable. No media outlets back home informing the Norwegian population about Israel also having total control over the territory in all meaningful senses of the word, and at any point could cut off the water supplies, electricity, and close down the education system, without anyone in Norway hearing about it. And then as well, and most important, without the possibility of the outside world for Norwegians to react. And as I was telling my story back home to my loved ones, it was a testimony that of course brought fear, and they couldn't really understand that this could be possible because the narrative was so ingrained in the Norwegian population back then. I was young and wasn't part of any influential circles. I was an Arabic student at the university. I had really no contacts back then and to tell any story to anyone. But I'm telling you now. And seeing the genocide that unfolds in front of everyone's eyes and witnessing again. Contrary to all the documentation that it is a genocide that I watched unfolding in slow motion before 7th October, but expanded after the new extreme far right-wing government of Netanyahu that took office in October 2022, a year before the massive-scale genocide started, after October 7th. Well, contrary to the fact that this, of course, is a genocide, and now everyone with a smartphone somewhere on earth is witnessing it, it still isn't part of our narrative in the newspapers, in the mainstream media. And as I myself have experienced in the days prior to the smartphone age, the narrative has been all wrong all the way here in the Western countries. For that reason, most people are not aware that there should have been implemented BDS from Norway and all the other countries many years ago. This genocide could have been stopped at any time before it even started. And there are many more like me having witnessed and also described the slow motion followed by the now high-speed genocide. One of them is Mats Gilbert here today, known throughout the world for his message during the Christmas holiday in 2008-2009, where he, in the middle of Israel's devastating war in Gaza, worked as a surgeon inside the Shifa hospital. In one of his messages, he wrote, "They bombed the central vegetable market in Gaza City 2 hours ago. 80 injured, 20 killed, all came here to Shifa. Hades, we wallow in death, blood, and amputations. Lots of children, pregnant women. I have never experienced anything so horrible. Now we hear tanks. Spread the word, shout it out, all, do something, do more. We're living in the history books now, everyone. Mats G. Gaza, Palestine." This message came to my phone and to thousands of Norwegian citizens. And the response from the Norwegian population were clear and strong. There was a huge demonstration in Oslo and other cities. And in Oslo alone, tens of thousands of people assembled and demanded that Israel should stop the war in Gaza. Thank you, Max, for telling me a true narrative, a true story in 2009. And many others, the possibility to act. I now give the floor to you.
Are you stopping me when I'm out of time? I have no recollection of time. 7.5 minutes. Assalamu alaikum. Ahlan Oslo, Habibi. And welcome to our very brave Jewish brothers and sisters. I think we should give them a big hand. They are let me start by thanking the organizers and then thanking my Palestinian brothers and sisters with the words that I think are very appropriate today. Kuluna Gaza, Gaza hatta Nasser, Palestine hatta Nasser. Som litt svake i arabisk, som betyr det også at Gaza seirer og Palestina seirer. So I have to immediately make a little opposition to the slogan here, lay down your arms. Because if there had been no armed resistance for the Palestinian struggle, they would have been defeated long ago. I support the armed struggle, I support the armed resistance, but of course within the limits of the Geneva Convention and the laws of armed conflicts. The Palestinian people are entitled to fight against occupation and racism and apartheid, just as the people of Ukraine are entitled to fight against the Russian occupation. Never forget that. Of course we all want a peaceful and a long-term solution, and as a doctor, I am trained, I studied here in Oslo. One of my teachers was Gro Harlem Brundtland, who at that time was the head of school medical services in Oslo. And she told us during her lectures, never forget that medicine is politics, because it's all about living conditions. And I never forgot that, and I never understood why doctors should be neutral. Because neutral and neutrality and immunity are two different concepts, and I tried to illustrate that. My good friend and brother, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, was here a few weeks ago in Oslo. He is living in the West Bank, occupied West Bank. He's married to Rita Gyakman, brilliant, outstanding academic Fedayins, resistance fighters. And he sent me a message this morning He said, and I quote from his message, "The Israeli army shot this morning with live ammunition in Nur Shams refugee camp in the West Bank. The lady, Sonos Shalabi, a 23-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant, and also shot her husband while they were trying to get out for medical treatment. She was critically injured, and the ambulance that finally reached her and took her to Talbot Hospital was held by the Israeli army for 30 minutes, during which time Sondos bled to death and her child died too. Her husband is in critical medical condition. They were accompanied by their 2 other children who witnessed the horror of their tragic mother's death," unquote. This happened this morning in occupied West Bank. The atrocities, the attacks on healthcare goes on as we are speaking and as there is a ceasefire in Gaza. If you cannot take a stand against an army attacking ambulances and killing pregnant women, you are on the side of the attackers. And you all know Desmond Tutu, the brave South African bishop and anti-apartheid fighter. He said, if you are neutral in a situation with oppression, you are on the side of the oppressors. And this is very prevalent in the medical community that I belong to and that Derek also will talk about. There has been a global, in the global West, almost complete silence about all these Israeli attacks on healthcare in Gaza. I'll come back to that. So neutrality is not an option in a situation with violence against the medical system or people. Immunity, on the other hand, is an important concept because the 4th Geneva Convention grants immunity to medical institutions, primary healthcare, hospitals, ambulances, and healthcare providers, nurses, doctors, paramedics, medical students, dental students. We are covered by this immunity, which means that an army or an armed faction cannot attack us. And these 2 different concepts are incredibly important to understand. Because what Israel has been violating, not only for the last 15 months, but for the last 75 years, is precisely the immunity of healthcare. I've been working in Gaza for more than 25 years. I've seen attacks on healthcare all the way. And during the last 15 months, there has been more than 1,000 attacks on healthcare in Gaza and in the West Bank, documented by WHO. There has been more than 1,000 healthcare workers killed in Gaza by the Israeli occupation army. That's a gross violation of the immunity of the healthcare system. And the third term, of course, is impunity. And the Israeli impunity is one of the core moral problems in the world today, because the Western powers have been granting Israel impunity for 75 years or for 100 years. Never ever until South Africa bravely took Israel to the International Court of Justice and to ICC. Until now, they have been granted impunity, which has led to this wild, crazy, unpunished attacks on healthcare, on patients, and on the civilian populations. We know more than enough, as was said. We have evidence up to the skies. We have research. We have documentation. All we need to take a stand. Why are the Western governments still silent about the war crimes of the Israeli occupation army and the Israeli government? There are 3 types of crimes perpetrated at the same time against the people, not only of Gaza, but now also, of course, the people of the West Bank. It is collective punishment, it is ethnic cleansing, and it is genocide. All 3 together, now supported by President Trump. We are in a very precarious situation. If we do not act, if we do not speak up, we are complicit. If the Norwegian Medical Association do not speak up, if our Minister of Foreign Affairs do not speak up, on each of the occasions of the breaches of international law, we are complicit. There is no neutrality.
summarize right before you just a few facts from the research. I brought with me a few scientific papers. We just published a paper yesterday, which is entitled Realizing Health Justice in Palestine Beyond Humanitarian Voices. Because the international humanitarian industry is part of the colonial project. By keeping silent all the teams who goes to Gaza without addressing the root cause are complicit in covering up what is the root cause. And that is the occupation of Palestine and the apartheid of the Israeli settler colonial project. As a doctor, I need to find the root cause for your pain. I cannot just go ahead and give you morphine for the pain, because behind the pain there might be a tumor, there might be a myocardial infarction, there might be something really bad that you needed to treat. The pain of Gaza is, of course, the numbers of killed, the numbers of people buried under the rubble, the number of amputated children. But that is a symptom, and the root cause that we need to solve is the occupation of Palestine and the Israeli settler colonial project. If we don't solve that root cause, any kind of humanitarian assistance becomes part of the problem as a cover-up for what is the root cause. We know from recent research, take home some facts. Life expectancy in Gaza for ordinary people has dropped with an unimaginable number over the last 12 months when this study was done. It has dropped by 30 years, 30 years. Anyone living in Gaza now can expect to live 30 years shorter than before the 7th of October. Number 2, Gaza has been put back 70 years, 70 years in development, according to the UN. And the third fact, the numbers that we talk about of killed and injured are underestimated by a factor of 41%. 41% underestimated. And these are the numbers that we can see in the weekly reports from the UN, the OCHA reports, which now sums up 47,354 killed as of the 28th of January. That is 41% too low. So 70 years back in time, 30 years shorter life expectancy, and 41% underestimated death tolls. The gravity of the assault on the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank will soon appear. And it will shake us to the bones. And it will shake any government that did not stand up and say, this has to stop immediately. And I think that what we need to do is that we need more action, not less action. We need more evidence-based solidarity. We need to study and read and understand the numbers and the facts. And we need, as Norwegians, to be much more daredevilish in our pressure on the Norwegian government and each and every member of parliament in Norway. Where do they stand? What do they do? What do they promise for the next election? We need less talking, more action, more pressure. And I say, as my friends, my brave friends in Gaza say, we will never forget. We will never forgive. Because what is going on now is 100% man-made. And every piece of suffering, of killing, of sadism in Gaza could have been avoided had there been pressure on the state of Israel and on the state of the United States. That is part of the Norwegian responsibility, and it keeps going on. As you know, the Israeli occupation forces are now trying to make West Bank like Gaza. The atrocities goes on, and we cannot stay idle. I urge you all, do more. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has a talent. If you can play cello, or you can write a poem, or you can paint a beautiful picture. Everyone need now to understand that we are in a critical juncture of history, because with the Trump speech And the comparison to Hitler's speech is extremely worrisome. Stop laughing at Trump. Start acting against the new colonial era that we are entering into. And we as Norwegians must do much more to stop the Norwegian government from speaking feebly and to not pressuring the United States. And I'm afraid that the friendship between our new Minister of Finance and Mr. Trump is not promising that the government will do more. It's up to each one of us. History will tell. We are living in the history books now. Long live the friendship between the Palestinian and the Norwegian people.
Our next speaker, who is Dr. Summerfield. You don't have to go anywhere. You're coming right up. Dr. Summerfield is currently honorary senior lecturer at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology, and Neuroscience at King's College London. He is known for his outspoken criticism of the medicalization of trauma and for his unwavering support for Palestine. Dr. Summerfield.
I don't know whether I need this or not. Maybe I don't. Can you hear me all right? We don't have this technology in London. Anyway, it's very fine to be here. I'm London-based, but I'm actually from Zimbabwe. Is anyone else here from Zimbabwe by any chance? Sorry. No, I thought not. Right. What I want to talk about is a 25-plus-year campaign about two things about Israel. Israel is not the only perpetrator in the world in this respect. That is torture as state policy and the collusion of doctors in the Everyday Commission. And what would the torture policy be if doctors refused to participate? This is a struggle that gets you repeatedly labeled anti-Semite in the journals and in the newspapers, even in medical journals. But I'm always remembering what Noam Chomsky said about anti-Semitism. Every time they call me an anti-Semitism, I know I'm on the right track. So that's it. As you know, in the Second World War, German and Japanese physicians distinguished themselves by doing experiments on concentration camp victims and on picking those who would either work or be immediately gassed. And in direct response to that, a body called the World Medical Association was set up after World War II as the international watchdog of the ethical behavior of doctors. And what I'm going to describe to you is my experience over 12, 15 years in bringing a case to the World Medical Association about Israeli physicians and the head of the Israeli Medical Association, a case that has spanned 4 presidents of the World Medical Association and 3 UN special rapporteurs on torture, and the story has been one of complicity, even at that level, and therefore impunity. So that's what I want to describe. Torture has been state policy in Israel, been the interrogation of Palestinians from the beginning. From the beginning, yeah. In May 98, a Human Rights Watch report recorded that Israel continues to use torture and cruel, inhuman or degrading treatments during the interrogation of Palestinian detainees. The use of torture by Israeli officials is both widespread and systematic. The UAT coalition has observed and recorded acts, omissions and complicity by agents of the state at all levels, including army, intelligence, police, judiciary and other branches of government, including the medical profession. No Israeli official has ever been brought up to court in relation to torture. Not ever. In May 2009, I launched a case about this. This was a test case brought to the World Medical Association, whose remit is what I described since the Second World War. And I recruited 725 doctors from 43 countries. And we made repeated evidence-based appeals to them at a point where the Israeli Medical Association president, who had previously justified torture in the pages of The Lancet, a famous medical journal, had become president of the World Medical Association, no less this ethical body. It's a bit like a sort of convicted war criminal becoming president of Amnesty International kind of thing. And what I discovered over these years is that bodies like the World Medical Association had long since been bought out, were in corrupt collusion, were never set up to bring countries like Israel, the UK, the US to justice. The doctors, they would speak about doctors in Bahrain or Iran, but not us. Not us. Yeah. This was an appeal which I supported by Noam Chomsky and a number of other people in the US, like Norman Finkelstein, and brought to subsequent presidents. This is the kind of thing that we were bringing, that doctors colluded at every level. They would examine prisoners between torture sessions, would sometimes give them an aspirin, return them to the interrogators, knowing what was going on. They did not take a medical history because they knew why these people were injured. Yeah? They returned them. So they were part of the institutionalized management of this. Physicians for Human Rights Israel, with whom I'd worked, said that if the doctors refused to be connected to the torture scene and in the building, torture probably couldn't proceed. So doctors have had this power, and they have, with a few exceptions, have violated their oaths, the Hippocratic Oath, and have been part of this process. Consider this, as long ago as 1993, Amnesty International brought a case of a guy called Nadia Kumsia, who 5 days after his arrest was brought to a medical center in Beersheba, where a urologist diagnosed a torn scrotum, and he'd been beaten on the testicles during interrogation and torture, and he documented that. The doctor did. Shortly after that day, he received a call from a military personnel, and as a result of that, he altered his medical report. The original report vanished, and he fell down the stairs. So one of the problems is that doctors are intimately involved in providing information to the torturers to make their work more effective, medical information, how much more the patient can, the detainee can take. They misinterpret or write false things in the medical record, which makes it impossible for later investigators to come and use the medical records to indict those doctors, because the records are falsified. I mean, Physicians for Human Rights Israel documented 700 complaints about torture made to the authorities in Israel. Not one has ever been investigated. Not one. This is what Physicians for Human Rights said. Doctors passed, as I said, information on to the interrogators, returning interrogators to the custody, and taking part in extreme cases in the interrogation. This is the key point. Because doctors are present, the interrogators, torturers, feel in some way indemnified. They feel there's something legitimate about this. Doctors are part of the team. Yeah, that's the role they play. To give comfort and consolation to the interrogators, to give them indemnification. This extends to the hospitals. The World Medical Association edict for doctors on torture is that doctors must not just take part, must not just be part of the team, but if they suspect torture, they have to speak out. Inaction is not an option. So consider this case. September 2019, a healthy 44-year-old man called Samir Arbit was arrested, and a few days later, after severe torture, was admitted to intensive care at Hadassah Hospital, reportedly on a ventilator with kidney failure and broken ribs. It takes a lot to produce kidney failure in a few days in an injured man, a lot. The authorities were quoted saying that once the doctors improved him, he could be returned for future interrogation. Every one of those doctors was in violation of the World Medical Association codes. The doctors who were part of the team that produced this torture, the doctors who admitted him at Hadassah Hospital and, in a way, saved his life, he was in intensive care, but then returned him to the same thing. All those doctors are besmirched then by this collusion with torture. So where does that leave us? Since October the 7th, the role of doctors in relation to ill treatment and torture and murder in Israel has hugely increased. Their presence in the torture rooms has been documented in a way that hasn't been quite before, and there's a scene I saw described in which an Israeli doctor is participating in the torture of a Palestinian doctor arrested in Gaza. What is that? What is that? Huh? Since October the 7th, we've seen probably the greatest standalone war crime since the Second World War. And doctors have shown utterly that they have abandoned their medical ethics every bit as much as those Japanese and German doctors abandoned it in the Second World War. An utter disgrace. And what we have, of course, is the impunity that comes from the threats made when this stuff is published. I mean, the editors of famous medical journals like the British Medical Journal and the Lancet have both been threatened with dismissal and the journal boycotted on accounts of information that I and others have put in there, all evidence-based. So this is what we have to fight. And to finish, our weapon has to be boycott. It has to be boycott. Those doctors as individuals or as part of medical departments in hospitals. The Israeli universities are completely complicit with everything that's gone on there. We have to boycott these people, refuse to work with them, attempt to eject them from other kinds of world medical bodies, the World Federation of General Practitioners, and this is the only way. These doctors are not part of a medical community that we would ever identify with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Summerfield. We've now come to the part of the program where our panelists will face the questions from the Devil's Advocates. Devil's Advocates here are Ögmundur Jónsson from Iceland. He is the former Minister of the Interior of Iceland, and Dr. Deepa Driver, who is co-founder of the Institute for the Public Interest. One last thing. After they're finished asking or posing their questions and comments to the panelists, we'll also take some questions from the hall here, so please get your questions ready. I just want to remind you that questions begin with who, what, where, when, not with I. Questions must be short. Thank you.
Could we have some monitor on us?
Thank you very much for being here. Ögmundur and I have been tasked with starting off the questions, and we will keep our questions short. But before we do that, with the permission of John and Peter, I just wanted to share with you some information. But even before I do that, I wanted to say that when we think about the torture by doctors, of doctors, we should be thinking about Dr. Adnan Al-Bush and Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who is still not, as far as we know, not free and not safe. I wanted to take a step back in this piece of information to talk to you about another war, the War on Terror, which was another Islamophobic initiative of the United States. And one of the survivors of that war on terror is a man who is in Kazakhstan right now. He spent 15 years at Guantanamo prison, tortured, experiencing horrendous treatment, and thereafter the United States deported him to Kazakhstan, which he has no connection with, and for the last 10 years he has been in Kazakhstan, mainly under house arrest, occasionally getting beaten up by the intelligence services, etc. Sabri Mohammad al-Qureshi learned to paint at Guantanamo. We like to think of him not as a Guantanamo prisoner who became an artist, but as an artist who was for some time at Guantanamo. The Institute for the Public Interest would like very much to invite you to, in the break and whenever you can, to see some of Sabri's paintings, only from the period of Guantanamo. The more recent paintings, we have over 3,000, will be shown when Sabri is able to come to Norway, hopefully soon. The paintings reflect a very subtle political message. They are from a different war and a different place. But I think the message continues here in this room. And my first question, therefore, is to you, Derek, who I know you've done a huge amount of work in this area. Are you able to share with us some of your views on the complicity of professionals in these war zones? And other than boycott, what other techniques have you used, and what techniques have been used against you to stop? And in particular, I'm looking for that story, Derek, about the defamation case that was used against you, if you are willing to share it. Thank you.
Yes, I will also pose a question, a very general question, but I must admit at the beginning that I feel a little bit uncomfortable to be the devil's advocate, because the devil has too many advocates in the world. I suggest that for the next meeting we should rename people with our functions and call us advocate for the public interest. My question is very, very wide, very general. Dr. Max Gilbert said that we were at a critical juncture in history. Now, I am the same age as the State of Israel, 76 years old, born in 1948. All my lifetime, we have experienced oppression in Palestine. Land has been stolen, people have been forced from their homes, there have been mass imprisonment, thousands killed, torture. But my question is this, about the critical juncture in history with Gaza. Is there a qualitative difference we are experiencing with Gaza now? This is a question for all of you.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Just to take up a deepest point, I would contrast two kinds of medical behavior, if you like. There's the medical behavior of doctors who are attached to the Israeli Medical Association, general doctors, who, if they spoke out, would, in Israel, and very few have, against all of this, a few have, if they spoke out, nothing would happen to them. No death squad would arrive at the door to take them away, yeah? Which of course has happened to some doctors in South American countries in some situations. Nothing like that will happen. They choose not to speak out, yeah? As Chomsky said, you want to be a moral agent or a servant of power? The medical profession in Israel largely has chosen to be a servant of power. You may say that's true of medical associations all around the world. The doctors are a conservative body who in general are closer to people with power and money than those without. So it contrasts that sort of behavior to the behavior of Palestinian doctors in these last few weeks who've refused to leave the hospital, knowing that they're targeted. They're not just killed accidentally, are targeted. Yeah? Some have been arrested. Dr. Al-Bush, who is the chief orthopedic surgeon in Gaza, he was, the army surrounded the hospital and said with a loudspeaker, Dr. Al-Bush, come out or we will bomb the hospital. Healthy 50-year-old man, he trained partly at King's College in London. He came out of the building, was never seen again. 3 weeks later, Israel announced that he was dead. So he was tortured to death, head of orthopedics. Yeah. Who protested about that? King's College, of which I'm associated, London, refused even to comment on the fact that one of their alumni had been killed in that way. So this is the kind of impunity we're up against. But I just contrast two kinds of medical behavior. The Palestinian doctors in Gaza have been utterly heroic. They are the highest traditions of medical practice in the world. And what can we do to assist them? What can we do to highlight the difference between that kind of medical behavior and the medical behavior that is sustained Israel's policies of state torture and oppression all this time? The only thing that other thing to say is, I don't think it's terribly relevant, but a part of the struggle, mostly get called an anti-Semite and I get threatened and banned from certain conferences, as others do. But in 2009, the Israeli Medical Association took out a formal libel suit against me in London through top libel lawyers, which they ran for a while. But we rebutted it, and Noam Chomsky was on my side, who supported our campaign right from the beginning. So that's nothing. No one's going to come and shoot me, compared to what happens in other parts of the world, and certainly in Palestine. No one's going to arrest me and torture me to death. So there's not much heroism involved. Those Palestinian doctors, that's another order.
Dr. Gilbert. Sorry.
I just want to make sure we're hearing each other. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, I think there is a slight problem with...
Yeah, we can hear it now.
I just want to make sure.
Thank you, please, Dr. Gilbert.
Why is it a critical junction? Well, I think that when the world at large, have been watching 15 months of an extremely detailed genocide and ethnic cleansing with all types of weapons used against an incarcerated civilian population of 2.2 million people who have been under siege for 17 years, and the perpetrator, the occupier, is killing around 3% of that population, while the whole world has the information day by day on the numbers, on the types of killing, and on the attacks on healthcare, and do not react, apart from brave nations in the global south. And at the same time, the perpetrator is using starvation as a weapon of mass destruction, and at the same time are denying the international community access to provide humanitarian aid. We see a breakdown in what we thought was an organized or more or less organized world after the Second World War, where there were rules conducting armed conflicts. There were certain things you could not do, Geneva Convention and so on and so forth. What we have seen during these last 15 months is a dismantling of international order and a complete taking away of all authority from the United Nations. So this is a very dangerous time where the United States actually is actively supporting a dismantling of the United Nations, not only through the support of weapons and bombs and money and political support for the genocide in Gaza and the sadistic parts of it, the starvation, the lack of water, the lack of medical instruments and drugs, deliberately being denied. But also that United States now are supporting the Israeli attack on UNRWA. Don't forget that UNRWA was established in 1948 in order to make sure that the refugees produced by the establishment of the State of Israel would have education, food, social systems. And it's an incredibly important support for Palestinian refugees, not only in Gaza and the West Bank, but in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Egypt, and so on. 75% of the 2.2 million inhabitants in Gaza are formally refugees and provided by UNRWA. So the attacks on UNRWA is actually an attack of the constitutional right of refugees to return to their homeland, because they want to take away the formal definition of all the Palestinian refugees. So what we see, and that's why I say it's a critical junction, we see a new type of colonialism, a very aggressive, militant colonialism, supported by the United States. The test tube is Gaza and the West Bank, and the UK And the EU and most of the Western governments are dragging their heels, not condemning Israel and not demanding the United States to stop the support for Israel. We are entering a new era of colonialism, which will be more brutal than what we saw before because of all this dismantling on the international order. That's why I said it. Thank you.
Haim, please, and then I'll come back to you, Robert.
That's fine.
Thank you. I won't repeat what my friend Mads already said so effectively. I just want to speak personally for a minute what it means to me, because my parents survived Auschwitz and their whole family was killed by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Now, when they were killed, it took, about 4 years to kill not just the Jews of Europe, not just the 6 million Jews, which, normally Zionists stop at that, that's what they tell you, but 11.5 million Europeans, 5.5 million of them were Soviet prisoners of war, were killed in Auschwitz and Dachau and all the places that Jews were killed. So don't ever forget, we're not talking about only Jews, we're talking about almost 12 million Europeans. When this was going on, nobody knew about it. And when I grew up and heard the stories of my parents, I always thought, and I even stupidly told other people that, if only people knew during the Holocaust what is going on, it would never happen. How wrong I was. Here we are, the most televised, the most social media's genocide in history that people see, people, I'm talking about even children, see on their telephones. They see other children die in Gaza. This has never happened before. And nothing happens. Friends, really, nothing happened. All our action did not save one child in Gaza until now. This is a terrible thing to live through, because it means that the UN, all its operations, the different governments are actually unable, or most of them unwilling, to actually do anything about the Palestinians being killed and being genocided, being starved, being denied homes, being denied food, being denied everything in the full bright light of day on the media. This has never happened before. So that, what it means is that the very idea of international law is now gone. And we can't live with that. We cannot live with the denial of an order. We cannot live with the denial of rights. But that is what the United States, Israel, UK, France, Germany, Canada have done to us. They have destroyed the idea of shared humanity, a shared system of values, a shared system of sanctions against those who break those values. It doesn't exist anymore. We have to recreate it. We have to recreate a UN which is representative of humanity, rather representative of the United States and the West. This is something totally new, and if we don't do it, we will be even in a worse situation.
I was just simply asked, we will come back to you for questions, so if you have them, please indicate to us as we go along. I'm going to invite Robert and Mr. Rabah, please, to offer any thoughts, and then we will go to the audience.
Just very quickly, Jewish Voice for Peace and me, personally, we're very much oriented towards action that has a context. So, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank, and speaking as an epidemiologist, that's a symptom of a disease. And for our analysis, the U.S. as a power center is essentially a country killing war machine. How do we affect change? Well, we're trying to do it from the inside out in the U.S. And it's trying to generally slow down this country-killing war machine. And, you know, you see how it plays across the global north support of this country-killing sensibility. And that's most of what our mission is, in a sense. It's not in any way to de-center what's happening to Palestine and Palestinians. It's to say, this is one of those never forgets issues is associated with, that's never going to happen again. Well, clearly this kind of thing happens a lot. And there's lots of, let's call them symptoms. The disease from our perspective is this large empire imperial project that constantly is producing these quote-unquote hotspots. And part of what Jewish Voice for Peace is trying to do is to go essentially at military spending, ostensibly for, you know, killing civilians at this point, as well as, you know, trying to involve Americans, whether they're American Jews or not, in saying something about this larger system. And that context helps for me to put all of this in perspective, because you're getting both the microscopic and the macroscopic. They're completely solidly related, and for me that's very important. And that very quickly, it brings you back to Norway. Norway has a $1.6 trillion sovereign fund. Disinvesting from that is a thing that will send a message to the world, especially coming from a global north, Western European, quote-unquote, Northern European country. And that's why this little country, quote-unquote, has so much exaggerated, so to speak, power, oversized power to punch you up. And that's why it's incumbent on people here, notwithstanding Norway is a vassal state, to you know, pay attention. And there is the possibility of change, and I'm very sensitive to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert.
Speaker, microphone please.
اوكي. يعني الجرائم والمجازر التي ارتكبت في فلسطين لم يشهد لها التاريخ المعاصر مثيلا، خاصة بعد الحرب العالمية الثانية.
The crimes and massacre that are occurring and has occurred in Gaza and in Palestine were not witnessed in this world since the World War II.
هناك عاملين تغيرا لحدوث يعني هذا التغير الكبير. الأول تنامي وتعاظم الاتجاه اليميني المتطرف العنصري الفاشي في إسرائيل.
There are two main factors that led us to this massacre and crime. The first point is that political parties in Israel are turning to the side of the right extremist fascists.
والعامل الثاني تنامي دور اليمين المتطرف والعنصري في الولايات المتحدة وعدد من الدول الغربية.
And also as a second factor is also the same position of the political parties that are going to the racist and extremist right movement, not only in Israel but also in the US and the Western countries.
اليمين العنصري في إسرائيل يرى في اليمين المحافظ في الحزب الجمهوري الذي يعبر عنه ترامب أكبر نصير لمشروعه التصفوي ضد الشعب الفلسطيني ولإنهاء القضية الفلسطينية والحقوق الفلسطينية.
The right, racist and extreme parties in Israel sees a chance in the Republican Party of Trump to solve and to close for all the Palestinian issue and to eliminate the Palestinian cause.
في واقع الحال إسرائيل ليست دولة من دول الشرق الأوسط هكذا ترى نفسها.
In the actual situation, Israel doesn't see itself as a country in the Middle East.
هي دولة في الشرق الأوسط.
As a country within the Middle East, but it's a different country in the Middle East, a strange country in the Middle East.
لذلك تقيم علاقات حروب مع الدول وتمارس تجاه الشعب الفلسطيني سياسة إبادة وفصل عنصري وسياسة تهجير وتطهير عرقي على امتداد عشرات السنوات، لكنها وصلت ذروتها في العامين الأخيرين.
Therefore, the relationship between Israel and its neighboring countries is a relationship of war and with the policies of displacement and erasing the Palestinian people.
ماذا يعني حديث ترامب ونتنياهو عن تغيير وجه الشرق الأوسط؟
What meant, this is the question, what meant Trump in his vision, in his new vision for the Middle East?
المعنى هو ترتيب وضع منطقة الشرق الأوسط بإطار دمج إسرائيل في المنطقة من موقع القوة المتفوقة والقوة المسيطرة على المنطقة العربية بشكل عام، وعدم إنهاء القضية الفلسطينية وعدم حل القضية بإعطاء الشعب الفلسطيني حقوقه.
And his plan is to rearrange the Middle East and not only integrate Israel within the countries, but also make Israel as the strongest country in the Middle East.
لذلك نرى أن هناك تواطؤ أمريكي وبالتأثير على عدد من الدول الغربية والأطلسية هناك محاولات خلق شلل وعجز كامل في قدرة المجتمع الدولي أن يتدخل لتطبيق قوانينه. إن لم يطبق قوانينه الآن المجتمع الدولي متى سيطبقها؟
And therefore we see the implicity of the United States with the help of the European Union and the European countries to stop implementing the international law regarding Palestine.
السؤال الأخير: هل يمكن أن تأخذ الدول الأوروبية موقفاً مغايراً ينطلق من قيم حقوق الإنسان والعدالة وتطبيق القوانين الدولية بعيداً عن الموقف الأمريكي؟ هذا هو السؤال والتحدي.
And the main question for me is, can Western countries and Europe take another path, another direction against the plan of Trump and with using the international laws? Thank you.
Have indicated they want to ask a question, and I want to honor that request. The gentleman at the back and the gentleman in glasses there. I just wanted to, I can see there are more questions. Can I request you, because all our speakers want to speak on all subjects, that I request the speakers you only answer one question, one person, maybe a second. But if you could direct your question to the speaker, that would be very helpful. So could I start with the gentleman in black? Yes, thank you.
I want to ask a question to Ramzi Rabah, to the first speech you made. You said that you wanted a two-state solution based on the borders from 1967. Isn't it a better idea to base a two-state solution on the borders from 1947 to go back to the UN sharing plan?
Thank you. Before I bring in Dr. Ms. Rabah, could I take the second question as well, please?
Okay, I think I will direct my question to Mats Gilbert. How can we go from only opposing and calling out the genocide to actually effectively resisting the genocide? We cannot take up arms here. So what can we actually do? Must we not acknowledge that this is not Israel's genocide, but it's actually the US that stands behind this genocide? And also that it's not Trump's genocide, it happened during Biden's terms. So how can we then actually resist a genocide that is conducted by our ally in NATO? Must we not start reflectively opposing whatever the US asks us, including when the US asks us to start arming more? Must we not put down our arms? Perhaps remove the Y from the Mako and say, lay down our arms.
Sir?
في السياسة الواقعية تعني القدرة على التغيير.
In the actual in politics, we need an agreement or a change that can be happened.
والتغيير يبدأ بإنهاء الاحتلال للأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة عام 67.
And the changing can only happen with the start. The changing will happen firstly by ending the occupation that started on 1967.
وحق تقرير المصير للفلسطينيين الآن له ركيزتين.
And there are two main points for the self-determination for the Palestinians.
دولة فلسطينية مستقلة بسيادة كاملة على حدود 67 بدون احتلال واستيطان، وحق العودة للاجئين الذين اقتلعوا من أراضيهم عام 48.
Firstly, an independent Palestinian states and the right to the refugees to return to their home country.
هذه قرارات الشرعية الدولية لحل الصراع.
This is the international resolution to solve this problem.
التي تدعم حقنا المشروع والعادل كحقوق ثابتة غير قابلة للتصرف.
That support the right of the Palestinian to self-determination.
عودة اللاجئين تفتح على مستقبل العلاقة بين الدولة الفلسطينية وإسرائيل، لأن اللاجئين عددهم 7 مليون. هؤلاء يجب أن يعودوا إلى بلدانهم وقراهم في داخل إسرائيل ويتمتعوا بحقهم بتقرير المصير كقومية، يعني قائمة موجودة في إطار دولة ديمقراطية.
Firstly, the rights of the refugees they should have the rights to return to their old villages inside Israel and to have the rights to live there.
أنا لاجئ من حيفا.
I'm a refugee from Haifa.
أريد أن أعود لمنزل عائلتي في حيفا بطبيعة الحال.
I want to go to Haifa where my family grew up.
وجزء منها موجود هناك.
And a part of my family are still in Haifa.
لكن الحل التاريخي هو بتفكيك المشروع الصهيوني التوسعي وإجباره على الانحصار، هكذا يتفكك بدءا بإنهاء الاحتلال.
And the only solution and the historical solution that we seek is at first to end the occupation, the Israeli occupation in Palestine.
هكذا نفكك المشروع الصهيوني.
This is how we can dissolve the Israeli plan.
وعند ذاك دولة فلسطينية مع القوى الديمقراطية في إسرائيل يمكن أن نبحث بدولة لكل مواطنيها، لكن دولة ديمقراطية بخيار حر للشعبين.
And then when the two-state solution will take place, then the two democratic states can decide if these two states should become one state.
وعند ذاك القوى الديمقراطية الإسرائيلية تنهي دور إسرائيل كوكيل للإمبريالية الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط.
And then the Democratic Party and force in Israel will force Israel to stop its imperial and colonialism plan in the Middle East.
عندما ينتهي دور إسرائيل كمشروع صهيوني توسعي على حساب أراضي الآخرين وكدور وكيل للإمبريالية في الشرق الأوسط ومصالحها، عند ذاك تنشأ دولة واحدة يعيش فيها الشعب.
And when Israel will stop with this imperial plan and colonialism plan, maybe there will be a chance to form a one-state solution. Thank you.
Max Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Brilliant question. I totally agree with you. I mean, we have so much that we need to do in Norway to clear up and clean up our lack of support, active support for the Palestinian struggle, and our active resistance against the US dominance of Norwegian foreign policy. I totally agree with you. And I think one of the first things we can do is divest the pension fund from all stocks in Israeli companies and all activities that support the Israeli occupation of Palestine. That must be that is a very peaceful weapon. But my question is, where are the members of parliaments today? Why are none of them here? Where are the ministers from the new government? Why are none of them here? They are absent because they don't need to be here, because we do not pressure them enough. We have allowed the Norwegian parliament and the members of parliament to lie idle down in the water and just breathing through a straw and be hidden from the demand from us that they make a stand. We need now, we're going to an election this fall, we need to confront every member of parliament, every political party in Norway. Where are they standing on the issue of the Israeli colonial occupation of Palestine and the genocide in Gaza? Everyone must be confronted. And we, all of us, need to talk to our neighbors or family or friends or workplace to ask them, what more can we do to pressure the Norwegian government, to put pressure on the United States and their government? What we can do is to be more active. And we have a lot of things that we haven't done yet. We have not had a general strike. Why are we not pressing the labor unions more? Why are not the LO? Why hasn't LO called for a general strike, political strike, 2 or 3 hours in Norway against the occupation of Palestine and the genocide in Gaza? Why? Because there hasn't been enough pressure. Why haven't we pressured the sports movement? Why was this Israeli soccer team allowed to play in Bodø just a few weeks ago? Fine, they gave the surplus to Palestinian children, the Bodø Glimt, but they should never have been allowed to enter Norway. Why are US hangar ships regularly coming into the harbor of Oslo just to display that Oslo is a vassal state, is a puppet of the US foreign policy? Why don't we say to the Norwegian government and the member of parliaments and the parties, we will not vote for you if you don't make a clear stance against the Israeli and the US policies in Gaza and in Palestine? Because this is the start of a new era. I live in Tromsø. The Norwegian government allowed, without any discussion in the parliament, a new nuclear submarine naval base in my city. I can see it from the window of my office in the hospital. I can see those naval ships coming to Tromsø, which makes Tromsø a burning red-hot bomb target. We are underway to become really in the same position as Ukraine was. A forward spot, a very, very forward spot for the US encircling of Russia. Without any protests. We have a small protest against the nuclear...
Max, can we wrap up, please?
I wrap up. We need to do more. We cannot only go in the streets and shout Free Palestine. We need to be smarter, and we need to say that now is the time to stand up, or else our children and our grandchildren will face the same fate as the kids of Gaza. That's part of our struggle. Was that an answer?
So we are a little bit behind schedule. We're going to take a break now, lunch break. When we return, we've changed a little bit of the program. When we return at 2 o'clock, we'll hear the talk from Professor Ultananda, who cannot be with us today, but we'll begin with that at 2 o'clock. So there is coffee for the audience out here in the hall, and for the speakers, everybody here on the panel, as well as speakers coming up, would like to meet with you in the back room just by the entrance. So I'll be back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.